One day, oceanographer Tom, his wife Julia, and their 2 children, Cassie and Ben, embarked on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben focused on fishing and Cassie immersed herself in her gadget, Julia decided to take a swim. As she glided through the water, a sudden unease washed over her. Although the sea appeared calm, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that something large and menacing was lurking nearby. At the same moment, the yacht's instruments began malfunctioning. Preoccupied with fishing, Tom ignored the erratic readings. Julia's unease turned into panic as she struggled in the water. She screamed for help, but her family, distracted by their activities, didn't hear her. The sea seemed to pull her further away from the yacht. When her cries finally reached Tom, he sprang into action, steering the yacht toward her. Diving into the water, Tom rescued Julia with the help of their children. Once aboard, they managed to revive her. Furious, Tom reminded Julia of his rule to always inform someone before swimming. Julia apologized, and the family soon moved past the scare, focusing on a happier occasion, Ben's 13th birthday. They gathered around as Tom lit the candles on Ben's cake. Everyone celebrated, congratulating Ben and presenting him with gifts. Cassie captured the moment with a group photo. As they basked in the joyful atmosphere, Cassie received a call from her boyfriend, who mentioned a swim they had planned. Suddenly, a violent storm broke out in the background. Worried, Cassie listened as he reassured her before the call abruptly ended. She informed her parents about the storm on land, but before they could react, the yacht shuddered. Rushing to the deck, the family was horrified to see massive whale carcasses floating around the yacht. Tom explained that whales could become disoriented during storms. But these massive creatures were now pushing against the vessel, endangering their safety. Tom dives into the water but soon returns, injured. In his attempt to assess the situation, he accidentally cuts his shoulder on the propeller. Julia quickly tends to the wound, stitching it up as Tom explains that the yacht's shafts are likely bent from a powerful tail strike, making it difficult to navigate. Later, Cassie attempts to re-establish communication. But there's no signal, and the radio remains silent. Tom evaluates their supplies, estimating they have enough water for about 4 days. Despite their predicament, he reassures the family that being on a shipping route increases their chances of being found. However, ominous sounds echo from outside. When they step onto the deck, they are stunned to see glowing objects descending from the sky, getting closer by the minute. In a desperate move, Tom starts the engine and maneuvers the yacht away from one of the falling objects, but the engine soon fails due to damage. As another object crashes dangerously close, they realize these are artificial satellites. A fierce wind picks up, causing the yacht's instruments to go haywire. Overwhelmed by fear, the family retreats inside the cabin, donning life jackets as the yacht is tossed violently by the waves. A strange ringing sound fills the air, causing nosebleeds and nausea. Tom fires a flare gun in a futile attempt to signal for help. The family barely survives the harrowing night. By morning, they are relieved to be alive, but a large hole in the yacht leaves them puzzled about how they are still afloat. Stepping outside, they are struck with awe and disbelief. The ocean has vanished, and the yacht now rests on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a vast desert where the sea once was. Later, Tom tries to reassure his family, insisting that not everyone could have perished. As he takes measurements, he discovers the compass is malfunctioning, north is no longer where it should be. He deduces that the Earth's poles have shifted, a rare but not unprecedented event in Earth's history. The sea appears to have receded, suggesting a cataclysmic change, and Tom fears humanity may not have survived. Unable to process this devastating possibility, Cassie retreats to the cabin. Meanwhile, Julia takes inventory of their remaining supplies, while Ben releases colorful balloons into the sky, hoping to signal any survivors. Tom continues to send out distress signals over the radio and is surprised to receive a response from NATO, the captain of a small submersible. NATO explains that they were deep underwater when the catastrophe occurred, which spared them from the worst effects. However, with all communication systems down, expecting external help is futile. NATO predicts the sea will return in about a week, and when it does, it will be ferocious. He advises them to find higher ground before then. Julia quickly instructs the children to pack their belongings. Desperate to ensure his children's survival, Tom asks NATO to rescue them. NATO hesitates, explaining the submersible is small and can only accommodate one person. After some convincing, NATO agrees to take both children, and Tom provides their coordinates. He charts a course on the nautical map, assuring his family they'll reach the rendezvous point in a couple of days. The next morning, as the family prepares to begin their journey toward NATO's submersible, Tom steps onto the deck and notices a man with a dog approaching. Hoping for a peaceful encounter, Tom offers the man water. The stranger accepts, but suddenly punches Tom in the face. As Julia rushes to her husband's aid, the man stabs Tom in the chest with a makeshift spear. The dog keeps Julia at bay, forcing her to watch in horror as Tom collapses. Julia flees back to the yacht with the man in pursuit, sustaining an injury to her arm during the chase. She barely manages to climb aboard, screaming for help. Cassie and Ben, alarmed by their mother's cries, rush to her aid and barricade the cabin doors. Julia quickly hides the children in a locker, handing Cassie the flare gun with strict instructions to use it only as a last resort. The man breaks through the barricade and enters the yacht, forcing Julia to hide in the bathroom as she tends to her wounded arm. The intruder, clearly starving, heads to the galley in search of food. Seizing the opportunity, Julia sneaks out, but the man's dog attacks her beneath the yacht. In a desperate struggle, Julia kills the dog. The commotion alerts the man, who steps outside to find his dog's lifeless body. Using the distraction, Julia climbs back aboard the yacht. But the intruder catches her. He beats and attempts to strangle her. Cassie, realizing the danger, fires the flare gun, hitting the man and igniting part of the yacht. Julia, now with no time to lose, orders her children to flee. While she sneaks towards the galley, the wounded man tries to attack again, but Julia kicks him away, grabs the bag, and jumps off the yacht. As Ben finds his father's body, Cassie runs toward the corpses and cries over them. Julia kisses her dead husband, takes the children, and leaves after seeing the killer emerge from the burning yacht. The boat explodes behind them. Julia, Ben, and Cassie run across the rocky desert, illuminated by the burning wreckage behind them. They find temporary shelter in a rocky canyon, but soon discover the nearby stream is salty and undrinkable. Ben, feeling responsible, believes the intruder was drawn by the balloons he released. Julia reassures him it wasn't his fault and encourages the children to stay strong for the journey ahead. As they continue, Julia spots the killer still trailing them. That evening, they come across a dead hammerhead shark. While Ben tries to butcher it for food, Julia notices the pursuer closing in. She urgently commands her children to run. Their escape leads them into a field of toxic waste barrels, grim remnants of human pollution on the ocean's former floor. Despite the risk of contamination, they push forward, knowing the relentless killer is still in pursuit. Dehydration begins to take a heavy toll on Ben, prompting Julia to give him the last precious drops of their water. Cassie, overwhelmed by despair, breaks down, convinced they won't survive. Yet, Julia refuses to let them give in, rallying her children to press on. Their perseverance leads them to the wreckage of a long-crashed plane, now resting on the dry seabed. Inside, they find a moment of respite. To lift their spirits, Julia shares the story of how she first met Tom in a hospital, where he was being treated for decompression sickness. The memory brings tears, as they mourn the loss of their father. During the night, Cassie is awakened by a faint noise. Steeling herself, she steps outside, acting as bait to draw the killer near. Just as he closes in, Julia springs from the shadows, stabbing him with a knife in a desperate fight for their lives. As dawn breaks, the family prepares to move on, only to discover that the killer's body has been scavenged, an ominous sign of even greater dangers lurking in the desert. Suddenly, Ben spots a small puddle of water shimmering in the distance and rushes toward it, ignoring Julia's warnings. Desperate for relief, he drinks from the puddle, only to collapse moments later, writhing in pain. Julia drags him away, realizing too late that the water was contaminated. As night falls, the family finds shelter beneath a pile of discarded plastic chairs, using them as a makeshift shield against the oppressive heat. However, as they try to rest, Julia hears strange noises from a distance. She steps outside and notices something moving in the darkness. Her heart starts pounding, and she wakes the children. The family runs for their lives, aiming for a large shipwreck silhouetted in the distance. Surrounding the wreck are shipping containers and a few desperate survivors. Julia waves frantically, calling for help, but the terrified people, seeing the advancing crabs, retreat into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her pleas. Julia and the children scramble onto a container just as the swarm reaches them. Fighting off the monstrous crabs, Julia suffers a deep wound to her leg. With immense effort, she helps Cassie and Ben to the top of the container. From their perch, they watch in horror as the crabs breach the survivors' container, tearing through it and killing everyone inside. As the chaotic scene unfolds, Julia succumbs to exhaustion and her injuries, collapsing on the container. And when she wakes the next morning, she finds herself alone, the crabs having moved on. Panicked, Julia calls out for her children. Cassie and Ben emerge from behind a nearby container, carrying scavenged supplies. Ben wields a makeshift spear, while Cassie clutches a rusted knife. They've managed to find a small stash of food and water, just enough to sustain them for a little while longer. Julia checks her leg, which is now severely infected. Searching through the belongings of a deceased survivor, Julia discovers a radio. Desperately, she attempts to contact NATO, the captain of the submersible. To her immense relief, NATO responds. He explains that he, too, has been battling monstrous sea creatures, deep-sea arthropods that surfaced when the ocean retreated. NATO warns that the sea will soon return, bringing even greater dangers with it. He informs Julia that he has launched a flare to mark his location. Ben spots the direction of the flare, and the family begins their arduous final trek toward the submersible. The journey is fraught with peril, from jagged terrain and toxic pools to signs of more scavenging creatures lurking nearby. As they press on, Cassie grows frustrated, accusing Julia of focusing solely on saving them at the expense of her own well-being. Julia remains silent, her determination fixed on ensuring her children's survival. Their path leads through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. Navigating the rocky terrain becomes increasingly difficult. Suddenly, a rock slide crashes down, separating Julia from her children. Trapped on one side of the canyon, she shouts to Cassie and Ben, urging them to continue without her. Cassie refuses to leave Julia behind. Julia, fighting back tears, pleads with her. "You have to save your brother. Go." Reluctantly, Cassie takes Ben's hand, and they push forward, eventually reaching the yellow submersible. However, their relief is short-lived when they find it seemingly abandoned. Suddenly, Nato, severely injured, stumbles from behind the vessel. With a grim resolve, he tells them that his wounds are fatal but orders them to board the submersible and prepare to dive. As they start to follow his instructions, Cassie hesitates. "I'm not leaving without Mom," she declares, her eyes filled with resolve. At that moment, Julia is still struggling, using her last few bullets to fend off the relentless crabs. She sees Cassie rushing back toward her, scaling the rocky barrier with determination. Cassie reaches out her hand, and with the last of her strength, Julia grabs hold. Together, they scramble back to the submersible, narrowly escaping the swarming crabs that overwhelm Nato in a tragic sacrifice. The family barely makes it aboard as a massive wave looms on the horizon. The sea is returning. The water crashes down with immense force, lifting the submersible and dragging it across the jagged rocks. Watching in stunned silence as the harrowing memories of their journey flood her mind, the physical and emotional toll proves too much, and she collapses into unconsciousness. When Julia awakens, the submersible is eerily still. She climbs out of the hatch with Cassie and Ben, their eyes wide with disbelief. They find themselves in the midst of a ruined city, carried far inland by the force of the wave. The landscape is unrecognizable, filled with shattered buildings and debris. Though they have survived, the realization hits hard. The world they once knew has been irrevocably altered. Please like and subscribe for more video like this. Thanks for watching.